Jesus is a king, and a king needs servants. Jesus, having gathered his disciples, now teaches them how his servants should be and act. At the same time, the crowds who follow Jesus also wish to hear his teaching. Jesus' requirements for his disciples demand a higher standard than the Pharisees and Sadducees. What will King Jesus require of his disciples? Idon de tus oculus anebe est ta aras, kai kathisantas autu praselthan auto hoi mathitai autu, kai anoixas ta stama autu, edidasken autus legon, makariai hoi ptokoi to pneumati, hati auton estin he basilea ton uranon, makarioi hoi penthuntes, hati autoi paraklethe santai, makarioi hoi praes, hati autoi kleraname susin tain gain, makarioi hoi penontes kai dipsontes tain dikaiasunain, hati autoi kartaste santai, makarioi hoi eleemanes, hati autoi eleethe santai, makarioi hoi katharoi te cardia, hati autoi tan than op santai, makarioi hoi ere no poioi, hati autoi huioi theo clethe santai, makarioi hoi de diagmenoi anakin dikaiasunes, hati autan estin he basilea ton uranon, makarioi este hatan ane disosin humas, kai dioxosin, kai posin pan paniran, kathumon pseudomonoi enekin emu, kai reta kai agaliaste, hati hamisthas humon palus en tois uranois, hutos gar edioxan tus prophetas tus pra humon, humes este ta halas tes geis, hean de ta halas moranthe, Antinia halis thesantai, eis uden isque, eti e me blithen hexo katapathes thai hupaton anthropon, humes este ta phos tu cosmo, hu dunatai palis krubenai epano aurus ke mene, uda kaiusin luknan, kai titheasin autan hupatan madian, al epitein luknian, kai lampe pasen tois ente oikia. Hutos lampsata ta phos humon emprasthen ton anthropon. Hapos idosin humon ta kala erga. Kai daxa sosen tan patera humon, tan entois uranois. Me na miseta hati althon, katalusai ta naman, etus prophetas. Uk elthan katalusai, ata plerosai. Amen gar lego humin. Heos parelthe hauranas, kai hege, iotehen, e mea karaya, hume parelthe apatunamu. Heos panta genetai. Hos ean un luce mian ton entalon tuton ton elakiston, kai didaxe hutos tus anthropus. Elakistas klethesetai ente basilea ton uranon. Hos de poiese kai didaxe, hutos megas klethesetai ente basilea ton uranon. Lego gar humen hati ean me perisiuse humon hedikaiasune pleon ton grammateon kai pharisaion. U me eseltheta es te basilean ton uranon. If you've been a Christian for a while, you've read and heard the Sermon on the Mount. Many scholars wrote commentaries on this sermon. Some even wrote volumes on it. This sermon is the first major block of teaching in Matthew's Gospel, or as I call it, Matthew's Manual of Discipleship. And because of that, serves as a foundation for Christian ethics and discipleship. Now, I don't want to overcomplicate the Sermon on the Mount. After all, it was written for ordinary Christians like you and I, not for a scholarly elite. At the same time, Jesus' commands and teachings do require serious thought and study. I'll illustrate this with a few examples of easily understood teachings and some examples of some of the harder to understand ones. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you, and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. These commands of Jesus are fairly easy to understand. However, some other teachings and commands of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount are difficult. Here are some examples. But I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Those last two teachings are difficult. In one case, taking the first teaching literally would require us to never fight back against evil. Surely Jesus can't mean that, since he stood up against it, whether it was against the Sadducees, the Pharisees, or in his exorcisms. The second teaching begs the question of how the eye is the lamp of the body. So what exactly does Jesus want us to do in these two teachings? How does one both interpret and apply these passages correctly? Scholars, theologians, and pastors have developed different ways of interpreting and applying the Sermon on the Mount. One scholar actually documented 40 different approaches. Without going into all 40 approaches, I'll list 3 that I've seen Christians use to interpret and apply the Sermon on the Mount. The first approach is to take Jesus' words and commands literally. Every word is to be applied as literally as possible. So passages involving turning the other cheek or not swearing oaths are to be obeyed as is. This approach does have strengths. It takes Jesus' words seriously, an area where many Christians could use improvement. For example, when Jesus gives commands regarding divorce, we dare not downplay what he says. But even a literalist would not take Jesus' hyperbolic command to gouge out eyes or cut off hands literally, which would miss his main point, which is about avoiding sin in life. There are quite a few other places where Jesus clearly is being hyperbolic, and where a literal interpretation would not work. The second approach involves understanding the principles behind Jesus' commands. We don't take the commands and teachings literally, but look for the underlying principle behind them. This is very useful for understanding commands or teachings that are hyperbolic, or only could be applied literally in Jesus' time and culture, such as Jesus' command to go an extra mile when someone forces you to go 1 mile. At the same time, this approach can undermine the seriousness of Jesus' words, or downplay them for the sake of convenience. The third approach is that this sermon is pre-evangelism, or evangelistic. This approach believes that the sermon's purpose is to show us that we cannot achieve the standards which Jesus requires, and therefore draws us to faith in him. I would argue that there are clearly places where Jesus does present something like evangelism, such as his statement that unless our righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees and Sadducees, that we will not enter the kingdom of heaven, or the narrow and broad path, among others. Yet, it seems that Jesus intended his followers to obey the commands present in the Sermon on the Mount. While the pre-evangelism approach can't be completely discarded, it doesn't explain the whole sermon. So, how do we interpret and apply the Sermon on the Mount? I would suggest several principles to interpret and apply it. I adapted some of these principles from the book Become What You Are from Dr. William Klein. This is a great book for understanding how to practice the Sermon on the Mount. You may not agree with everything he teaches, as I do, but it is a very good resource for interpretation and application of this sermon. Here are some principles to use with the Sermon on the Mount. Take Jesus' words as literally as possible when appropriate. Use common sense and good interpretive skills when studying Jesus' commands. When Jesus' words are not meant to be literally obeyed, find the underlying principle or intention behind the command. Remember that how Jesus' commands were applied in his time and culture may require different application today. If there is any unclear command in the Sermon on the Mount, see how Jesus acted in the Gospels to provide explanation, and use the analogy of Scripture if needed. That is, Scripture interpreting Scripture. Now, let us go into the commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. Hello everybody, thank you for coming to listen to the Matthew 5 Greek reading. I also thank you as well for listening to this video and watching it. I do apologize about the delay with getting this over to you all for a couple of reasons. First of all, it is the Sermon on the Mount. Basically every single verse in the Sermon on the Mount has something to say about it, and do apologize about that. But let's go ahead and go through this. Let's see what we can find out. And hey, along the way, we both, all of us, learn something from here. So let's go ahead and take a look here and see what we have. So let's see. Let's take a look. Now, Matthew 1 and 2 here is basically setting up a scene for the Sermon on the Mount. So a couple things to notice here. First, you have the crowds. If you remember from the last video, the crowds can be kind of treated as a single character. And then we have next the disciples, right? They're another character. They're treated as a group here. And then, of course, we have Jesus, right? So we have here three, you could call them individuals, right? The crowds, the disciples, and Jesus. Now, as you're seeing this scene here, you might be thinking, as you're going through this, that, oh, this kind of sounds like, Jesus kind of sounds like he's about to give like a great proclamation, or like something really important is going to happen here, which is true. A lot of commentators talk about certain parts of this, such as, for example, you have Jesus going to a mountain. I don't think it's a literal mountain, probably more maybe like a hill, or maybe like on top of a hill. And so people kind of see Jesus kind of being compared to like a new Moses or something like that, as being kind of like a new lawgiver. And we're going to be seeing that in this Sermon on the Mount, right? Jesus is going to be introducing I don't know if I hesitate to say a new kind of ethic, because I think a lot of what you, maybe all of it, what you see here in sermon, is actually found in the Old Testament in some capacity. The difference, of course, is this is Jesus proclaiming this, and he is the Son of God. So let's go ahead and go through a couple things. So the first thing we get to are the Beatitudes. So what are these Beatitudes? What do they mean? Well, there's a Greek word for Beatitudes. Well, not Greek word, Beatitudes. Is called, these are all blessings, right? That's kind of where Beatitudes comes from. These are all blessings. And so what Jesus is saying here is, it's a Greek word, makarios, as you can see right here. So it means blessed. Now, what does it mean to be blessed, or in this context here? Well, blessing can mean to be happy, right? Blessing can also mean to be approved of by God. So when you see these Beatitudes are virtues. They're virtues that God approves of, right? So we need to think of this here. I don't think it means happy, because I think when you especially get to verse number 4, like, blessed are the ones who mourn. I don't think if you're mourning, you're happy, right? So we need to keep this in mind. So what kind of behaviors does God approve of? Well, we're going to be finding that out here. So, verses, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Let's talk about, what does poor in spirit mean here in this context, right? Does it just mean the literally poor, or does he? And hopefully you guys can't hear anything outside. Sorry about that. Sorry about the extra noise. What does Jesus mean here? Does he mean literally poor, or what kind of poor are we talking about? So hoi petokoi to pneumati. So here, poor is being qualified by the phrase in spirit, right? So this is referring to poor in spirit. What does that mean, poor in spirit? Well, here in this context, it would have to mean those um, who are humble before God, right? They don't rely on their own spirituality before God, right? They recognize how much they need Him, right? Because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, there's something interesting here, is that this particular beatitude is in the present tense right here. So those who are poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven, right? These are people who recognize they can't do it on their own and therefore need God, right? They can't save themselves on their own. So for those who are that, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Let's keep going down. Blessed are the ones who mourn, because they, now this is a future tense verb, they will be comforted. So these other beatitudes you're going to see are all in future tense. So what does that mean here? Well, it means that these are blessings. Now, it's not impossible that they come in the future. Maybe if you mourn, you can be comforted now, of course, but these are all anticipating a future fulfillment, right? Future fulfillment when Jesus returns, right? Blessed are, we get the blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, because they will inherit the earth. Now, is this word here praise? So when we think of meek, we have to be kind of careful here. It's not referring. Oh, I guess I should back up actually. The ones who are mourning, a lot of commentaries say these are ones who mourn like for their sins or for others' sins, and I think that's a good point right there. Right, these are people uh, who recognize their own sin, and probably not just their sins. I would say the sin they see around them. Right, they're concerned for that. Blessed are the meek, because they will inherit the land. Or sorry, I didn't say land, the earth. Um, so when we talk about meek here, we need to offer some clarification. When we think of a meek person, we usually think of somebody who is very maybe humble, right? If you go to the extreme, we maybe think of somebody who is a doormat, maybe somebody who's weak, who just lets people walk over him. We have to keep in mind, Jesus does not actually mean like that meek, right? Meekness here in this context, based on what commentators will say, is that it has to do with like a like a humility, a gentleness, but also of strength under control. I've heard this one time defined as like meekness is strength under control. And if we look at Jesus' behavior in the Gospels, he certainly does demonstrate that, right? He he certainly does not do anything apart from the Father's will, right? But at the same time, he also does not allow people to walk over him. So we have to keep in mind this is what this meekness means. And oh, hold on, we got interesting here, a textual critical issue. So let's see here. It's 4-5. It's a B ranking. So it says here, blessed are Then it goes from here. For they will mourn. Blessed are the ones who inherit the land. Okay, so that's the original reading. Excuse me. Let's see here. Now it looks like here, as I say, blessed are the ones who inherit the land, or inherit the earth, ones that are fulfilled. This is an interesting one. So I think what this is saying here is that some manuscripts will put verse 4, then verse 5, and then but in some manuscripts, they actually reverse the order of this beatitude. So it's actually, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth, and then blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. So they reverse this here. Does this affect anything as far as interpretation goes or application? No, it does not, but that is interesting. I will have to look that up sometime. I'll have to look that up. Let's keep going. Hopefully you all can see this, so I do appreciate that. Blessed are the ones who hunger and thirst for righteousness, because they will be filled. So, this attitude here has to do with a desire to do good, right? Hungering and thirsting for righteousness, for they will be filled. There's that word righteousness right here, dikaiosune, or dikaiosune. We'll talk more about that later when we get to verse 20, but let's keep going. Blessed are the ones who show mercy. Blessed are the merciful, because they will be shown mercy. This merciful here, there's a couple ways this can be understood. One thing that's going to understand is forgiveness, right? Another thing this can be is like helping those who are in need, like being merciful, say, to the poor, which is kind of talked about in the Old Testament. So that's something. That's another one. Are you a merciful person? Blessed are the pure in heart, because they will see God. There's a kind of a little bit debate about what exactly pure in heart means. I've heard two interpretations. One means it has to do with like moral purity, right? So maybe is this referring to, say, like, sorry, I want to write this down. So moral purity, forget my bad handwriting, or is it referring to devotion, right? So you think of a pure in heart person as someone who's morally pure, right? We usually kind of associate purity with that. I'm pretty sure in the Old Testament you could probably see this. Or does this refer to devotion, like a single heart, right? Or like a heart that's pure is a heart that just isn't divided, if you will, right? I think here you could actually have both, because I would assume that a devoted heart is especially to God, and because that's what this would have to be towards. Especially because they will see God. I think this has to do more with devotion, but that doesn't exclude moral purity as well. Because you're devoted to God, you're going to be a morally pure person, right? Because they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be called They will be called sons of God. This word is pretty unique here. I think this, if I remember correctly, this is actually a word that's only used, I think, here in Matthew. I have to look that up. You have a verb form that's used of peacemaking, right? So what does this mean here? Are we talking about people who just like force peace on people? Is it just the absence of conflict here? No, I would say here, the big idea I would say is probably like reconciliation, right? So I think that's really, I would say here what you're saying is we can pursue reconciliation when it's possible, because they will be called sons of God. Now, if you guys recall, here's that word again, huios, sons of God. And a friend of mine recently was talking to me about this word huios, or sorry, yes. Sorry, I'm trying to remember how you pronounce the Greek word. I apologize for that. We keep in mind here, I have to ask, like, what is this word referring to? Like son, is it referring to like a literal son, right? Is it referring to a descendant? Or, as we talked about in Matthew 4, does it mean characterized by, right? Um, well, if you want to be called the Son of God, at least here in Matthew's Gospel here, how do you do that? You practice peacemaking, right? And we're going to be talking about what exactly peacemaking is as we go through. Um, we'll talk more about that. Blessed are the ones, let's see, persecuted on account of right. Oh, there's that word righteousness again. Now, a lot of times we'll get more into this when we talk about 20, but righteousness has a couple of meanings, right? It can like talk about like imputed righteousness, right? That's what we as Christians have. When we believe in Jesus, we get righteousness imputed to us, right? But righteousness can also refer to moral behavior. I think in this context it refers to just moral behavior, just for a righteous cause, right? It doesn't have to be the cause of Christ. It can be just something for that's good, right? Because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I apologize. Actually, this actually is a present tense one. And if you notice here, sorry, if you can't read Greek, what you recognize is this is actually a present tense blessing right here, right? Because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So these Beatitudes, theirs is the kingdom of heaven, kind of forms like the bookends of the Beatitudes. It kind of shows that they're kind of a distinct like section, if you will, right? Let's see. Let's keep going. And blessed are you whenever. Let's see. When they revile you and persecute you, and let's see here. Say all kinds of evil for you. Pseudomai, on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for thus they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So, hey, if you are persecuted for the cause of Christ, you know what? They also persecuted the prophets before them. That's a kind of a pretty big thing to say, because you think about the prophets in the Old Testament. You have to keep in mind, they did preach Christ, right? Or at least that preached. They anticipated Christ, the Messiah, right? Let's see. Oh, I see. There's a little bit of a textual variance. Take a look. Okay, so you probably notice up here that this word is actually in brackets here. So what that means is the people who put together the Greek text, they're actually not completely certain if this word was part of the original text. Like, if this word is part of it, there's a lot of doubt about this. So, pseudomenoi comes from the Greek group pseudo, or pseudomai, which means I lie or I deceive, right? So I go back here, pseudomai, that's the word that is in question, which just means, if we look at this, hold on, let me see here. Blessed are you when they revile you and persecute you. Or, sorry, I say you. As it persecute and say all evil. Say, and what is this all evil? It probably means every kind of evil against you falsely on account of me. So it's the word falsely, like falsely saying all kinds of evil. So there's one that says it includes that, and then there's some that omit this word. So does this affect interpretation here? I would say no. It does not, but it does clarify. They're not saying they're saying false things about you, right? So that is the Beatitudes. So that's actually the first section. I usually kind of like to think of the Beatitudes as like kind of like a Ten Commandments, if you will, like kind of like a new Ten Commandments, I would say. They don't nullify the Ten Commandments, but rather they're these virtues for believers to follow, right? And I kind of think that these virtues actually get played out much more in the Sermon on the Mount. I think well, we'll talk about the structure of the sermon in just a little bit. Next place is salt and light. You are the salt of the earth. If salt of the salt, okay, salty again. It's good for nothing except to be thrown out, drowned by men. No textual variance. You are okay. So let's talk about verse 13 here. Let's talk about the word salt here. What exactly does Jesus mean when he says that you are the salt of the earth? Let's talk about that. I have actually read that there's one commentary that actually talked about 11 different possible interpretations for the word salt. I've heard it range from things such as salt was something that was used in purity rituals, right? Salt in a time was meant to obviously it gives food taste, of course. Salt was also used as a preservative as well back in the ancient world. And I think if I remember back then, salt was also used for even I think medicinal purposes as well. So what exactly does Jesus mean when he says, you are the salt of the earth? Well, of course, nor to keep in mind, Jesus is not saying that you can be the salt of the earth or you should be. He says you are, right? And this you is referring to us as believers, right? So what does he mean by salt? Well, it's kind of tough to say what exactly the purpose of salt is in this context here. But I think it's going to be obvious from the passage. If salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty? It's not good for anything. So I think here the point of the salt one is not really about like purity, or things like that. I think this has to do more with, I would argue, like usefulness or impact. And we'll talk more about that later. But I think it has to do with salt being an impact, right? Let's talk more about that later. You are the light of the world. Let's see. Excuse me. Sorry. Need to get some water there. You are the light of the world. City set upon a hill or a mountain. It's not able to be hidden. They don't take a lamp and put it under a bowl, but upon the lampstand, and it shines to everyone who is in the house. Thus, let shine your light before men may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in. Okay, so the salt here and the salt metaphor and the light metaphor, this all has really to do with impact, right? You as a believer, right? Your actions, whether you like it or not, have an impact on the rest of the world, right? Hey guys, guess what? If you're a Christian, you're a model. You're meant to be a model for good behavior, right? And you don't get the choice. A friend told me that one time. Like, you're a Christian, guess what? You're automatically a model behavior. And this kind of gets into my devotional moment here. I kind of want to talk about this. I've thought about this a lot. And I think if I were to do a devotional on this point, I would say, based on the salt and light point, don't be a worthless Christian. Yeah, don't be a worthless Christian. Is it possible for you to be a Christian and be worthless, as in no impact? No impact on the world? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I know we can probably take and I think some people ask, well, is it possible for salt to be salty again? Does this mean that Jesus has some other meaning behind it, like, say, Christian can lose salvation or things like that? No. I don't think that's the point of this passage. The point being with this is that it's about impact, right? Right. Don't be worthless salt, right? Don't be a city that's or a city. Don't be a light that's on a hill or in a basket, right? Your impact, your behavior. People do notice your behavior. They will notice it, and they may ask questions. If I can just get a little personal here, people do notice a couple things with me in particular, and I'm not trying to like toot my horn. I'm not trying to brag, but there's two things people do recognize about me. One thing they recognize is that this is going to sound kind of silly, but I don't say swear words, right? I don't say any swear words. Well, in my life, I've worked mostly in the non Christian world, and people recognize that pretty quickly. It's like, oh, hey, theology. Well, they don't say theology, but you know what I mean. Theology doesn't swear. Why doesn't he swear? Right? And that does become a behavior people do notice. Um, and again, I'm not trying to brag here, but this is just sort of encouragement for people. People notice that I tend to be pretty patient, right? Maybe a little too much, but I don't react out of anger mostly. uh, Things like that, right? And I think for you all who are watching, other people are watching your behavior right now, right? They are watching it and paying attention. And does your behavior have an impact on people, right? Because that means people are going to ask questions, right? And ask about that. And yeah, I did. In case you're wondering, yes, I did have one time where people didn't notice I didn't say swear words, and I was patient and kind. And then they asked me that question. Well, why are you those things, right? Um, Sometimes I don't say it, but sometimes I say, well, yeah, it's because I believe in Jesus, right? And then it leads to other conversations. Oh, it's one thing I kind of wanted to show here. This word here, uh, moranthe. I'm trying to remember the verb form of this, but it's I think it's morano or moranao. I'm gonna probably butcher this. Um, this word literally here means to really it means be foolish, right? And that's what it literally means. So you could literally translate a sentence as, "But if the salt becomes foolish," of course it's not literally saying that. The other thing it can mean, if I remember correctly, is I think it means here like lose taste, right, or become useless. I'm trying to remember. You know what? Why don't we just go ahead and look it up? Let's look in the back of our New Testament. Let's go here. Let's see. Hold on. You know what? Let's go to the dictionary. How about? Right. Let's see if we can find it. Alpha and U. Here we go. Let's go. Where is it? Here it is. Mωραίνω. Right. Can mean make foolish or make tasteless. Passive become tasteless. Okay. We actually get a word from this, I remember, back when I was studying vocabulary. So for mωραίνω, we get a word. Anyone want to take a guess what that word is? It's the word moron. A moron is a fool, right? So, um, yeah. In fact, we all get all kinds of words from this. For example, if you say sophomore, have you guys ever heard of sophomore, right? Well, sophomore literally means a wise fool, because the word "soft" there comes from a word sophos, which means wise. So someone calls you a sophomore, they're calling you a wise fool, right? Anyway, that's my little devotional point here. Don't be useless salt. Don't be a light that's in a basket. Let your actions have an impact. And people are watching. And I'll tell you what, this world desperately needs, definitely needs someone with good behavior, with good Christian character, right? What's that Christian character? Well, it's all those Beatitudes we talked about, right? Let's keep going. Do not suppose that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy but the law. Now, of course, law and the prophets here, it's just another way of saying like the whole Old Testament, the law and the prophets. So, this did not come to destroy the law but to fulfill. Truly, I say to you. Let's see, let's keep going. There, if anyone should, yeah. Okay, so basically here it is. If anyone breaks, this can also mean loose. Right here comes from another word called luo, which means I lose, loose. Right. Anyone breaks at least these commands and teach others to do so, we call least in the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom, yeah, heaven. And whoever does these commands or keeps these commands and teaches them will be called great. So again, just here's just another encouragement here. Yeah, I mean, this should be pretty easy to follow. You know, if you're teaching others to break the commands, you'll be called least in the kingdom of heaven. If you break them and then you're teaching them, right? But then whoever keeps them and teaches others to do so will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Now, verse 20 here. This is a pretty big verse. A lot of people will, or commentators will say this verse here is sort of something as like the thesis statement, right? You guys know what the thesis is? That's like the main point, right? It's like the main idea. For I say to you that if, let's see here, hold on here. Greek is always like that, right? Sorry. That if your righteousness does not exceed more of the scribes and Pharisees, you certainly will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. So, a couple of interesting things here in this Greek. This is me. U and me are both the equivalent of no in English, right? You know how usually in English a double negative is like a positive, right? Um, you know, like we say, um, like do not teach to be good, right? Well, we mean that, you know, teach to be good, right? Sorry, it's a bad example. I'm just trying to think of this off the top of my head. In Greek, though, it's much different. Actually, a double negative here just means like certainly or surely, like it's like an absolutely no, right? So you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. So this is kind of an interesting verse because again, you have here this word here, dikaiosune, and that means again righteousness. Well, if you remember with righteousness, remember it can mean a couple of things. So it can mean like one, it can mean imputed righteousness, right? Or it can refer to actions, right? Or like our behavior, right? So it can mean like imputed righteousness or, sorry, as I bad, right? I can barely read that, but that's okay. Or mere actions and behavior. Well, what's going on here? Well, I will tell you, I would say here, again, it's arguing the behavior, right? I think that's what it's arguing about. Now you have to keep in mind in the culture, the scribes and the Pharisees they were actually, I know a lot of times like a Pharisees as hypocrites and things like that, but back in Jesus' time, these people they were the people who kept the law the best, right? They were actually considered like the moral people, right? And so this would become as kind of a shock to Jesus' audience because they really like what the scribes, I mean the people who are, you know, writing or copying the Old Testament, right? And it, you know, who also kind of became teachers of it. The Pharisees, I mean, my righteousness has to exceed theirs, and otherwise I won't enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, then how do I do that, right? Um, well, Jesus is going to talk about that, and I think this raises a really important point. I want everyone here to really keep in mind. is the intended audience for the Sermon on the Mount. If we go back to here, right, the crowds and the disciples. Whoops, crowds and the disciples, right? Remember, the crowds are kind of like this neutral character. Now, keep in mind when I say character, I don't mean fiction, right? They're kind of, it's neutral. They're kind of almost like observers, right? Like kind of just seeing what happens next. Whereas the disciples are those who are dedicated to Jesus. They believe in Jesus. The crowds, they may or may not believe, right? So what's going on here? Well, I think what Jesus is doing is he's actually appealing to two different audiences. This Sermon on the Mount is actually kind of like Jesus is going to kind of go back and forth between talking to the disciples and then talking to the crowds, right? If you remember, I talked about previously, some people believe this sermon's like some kind of evangelism or pre-evangelism, some way to prepare you for believing in Jesus. Well, I think this kind of illustrates that point, right? Jesus is going to go back and forth between here. There is another point I just forgot, and I kind of wish I would have addressed this earlier. Where exactly is the Sermon on the Mount located in Israel? Well, the answer is we really don't know for sure. There actually is, if you have a chance to actually take a trip to Israel, and if you happen to be in Capernaum and near the Sea of Galilee, you can actually go to a site that's actually traditionally believed to be the location of Sermon on the Mount. It's a place near Galilee. Not Galilee, it's a place in, it is in Galilee. It's near Capernaum. You can actually overlook, it's on a hill, and you can actually see the Sea of Galilee from there. And there's actually a chapel there. It's called I think it's called the Church on the Mount or something like that. It's like a church or chapel. You can still see it. You can still go there. Do I think that the sermon was there? I mean, I think there's a reason that people have kind of designated that area as like the where Jesus preached. And yeah, in case you're wondering, I don't mean to go on a tangent on this, but I think there's a reason certain people have identified certain places as, well, this is where, Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount, or this is where Peter's house was located. But yeah, you could still, visit there, and it's a really great view, right? Yeah, so anyway, let me see if there's anything else. Oh, this variation is until we get into next time. So yeah, so this sermon, another point I want to talk about is next time we talk, we're going to get into what's called the body of the sermon, right? I don't know if I really want to go into this or not, but a lot of people have tried to figure out the structure of the Sermon on the Mount, as far as what's going on here, like where is Jesus going? Is there some kind of pattern or things like that? One thing I do want to kind of bring up here is this entire sermon. Probably, if you actually, when you read it, it actually takes less than 10 minutes to read, right? I think the sermon lasted much longer than 10 minutes. Who knows? And I'm guessing Jesus probably talked about more things than what it's talked about here. So do we have the exact words of Jesus? I would say we do, right? Except Matthew, under inspiration of the Holy Spirit, took the parts of the sermon, of Jesus' sermon, that would have been very useful for his audience, and gave us this, kind of a compact version of it. So keep that in mind, because I think it's going to be important when we look into other parts of the sermon. But yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we maybe need. I'm going to go with more time. Let's see if anything else we need to go over. So, what would I say? If I want to summarize all of this? Well, I would say in this chapter, you know what? Be a Christian who is approved by God, right? How do you approve by God? Well, first you're poor in spirit. You mourn for your sins. You're a meek person, right? You hunger and thirst for righteousness. You are somebody that's merciful. You're someone that's devoted to God. You are a peacemaker. You are somebody who, well, I know it's persecution thing. You may not be persecuted now, but yeah, follow those. Follow those, right? Be the salt of the earth. Be the light of the world, right? And yeah, that's all I have for today, folks. So I do appreciate you all listening to this. And again, I do apologize about not getting this out sooner. I read the Sermon on the Mount and I realized, like, oh, this is going to take a very long time. I actually did almost complete the whole chapter, but then I realized, we get into verses 21 through 48. There's going to be a lot of stuff we'll talk about later. So, I appreciate you listening. And I just want to say, I'll see you next time. And until then, till next time, everybody, stay theological.